Guys, today we're going to be going over our pre and post testing for the mid-episode patch 8.0.5. And this patch came alongside Solstice of Heroes and actually included quite a few things. Think of this as like the mid-season patch, if you will. Now, some of these were intended, others not so much, as well as some baffling changes that has all of us scratching our heads. Now, the reason why this particular patch was a lot different than previous updates is that we didn't get a pre-update blog. The TWAB was canceled the week before Solstice launch due to the layoffs at Bungie. So a lot of these we didn't know about literally until the day off, which is why some of the testing here today is missing the pre-testing. With that being said though, we'll be looking at all of the impactful changes that hit our sandbox, which range from adjustments to weapons, armor, abilities, and the entire game's ammo economy. And that's actually where we're going to start, that being our ammo changes. Bungie corrected an issue that would allow swapping between regular armor mods and reserve mods to enable higher ammo counts than the current maximum. Now, they mentioned that this was never an intended functionality, but to help offset this, they mentioned that they were going to be buffing the following ammo-related aspects. First, reserve ammunition for all weapon types has been increased by up to 15%, with weapons with low reserves for their weapon type getting a larger buff. And then secondly, they reduced the cost of reserve mods by 1. Now, this patch note was effectively 2 parts. You've got the reserve mod side of things, which ended up affecting a lot more than just that, and you've got the game-wide ammo buffs. First, we're going to start with how much ammo every weapon type has received. Bungie said up to 15%, and this is mostly correct as the average increase we're seeing across all weapons seems to be closer to 10%. And that makes sense as reserve ammunition is based off of the inventory stat, which without Bungie worded the change, that 15% increase is likely only accurate if the reserve stat is minimal, meaning not most weapons. But looking at our individual ammo increases, where heavies are concerned, rockets and other low reserve weapons receive just 1 extra shot. Grenade launchers, which tend to have fairly high reserves, saw a buff of 2 to 3 shots. For example, Edge Transit only got 2 extra grenades, but our rapid fire Caraxes got 3. Now, swords were increased by about 10%, with this sword here going from 67 to 74. Linear saw an increase of 3 shots for both bursts and precisions. Machine guns actually varied quite a bit here, but those got about 40 extra shots. Now, for our special weapons, this too received a 10% increase. Shotguns were increased by 2 to 3 depending on the frame. Rocket sidearms got 8 more shots, which is quite substantial. Special grenade launchers were increased by 2, and fusion rifles got about 3 more shots. But this now takes us to what didn't get an increase, with the big one being snipers. Unfortunately, these weapons are actually seeing a decrease in ammo. This is really unusual. Rapid fires like Ikelos went from an ammo count of 30 to 24. Adaptives dropped from 22 to 16. Aggressives went from 20 to 16. So oddly enough, sniper rifles saw a decrease of 4 to 6 shots, or roughly 20%. Bungie has commented on this though, saying this will be fixed in a future update. By the way, you'll notice a trend throughout a lot of these post changes that there were a lot of unintended things that occurred. This is just one example. Now, for the rest of the funky interactions, Glaives, Trace Rifles, as well as Leviathan's Breath did not get an ammo increase at all. Now, I know that kind of makes sense for Leviathan's Breath considering the catalyst is supposed to max everything out, but if we were to take just the patch notes, it technically should have applied here, but not the case. With that being said though, a lot of weapons did get an increase, even weapons that I didn't even think needed an increase in reserves, including the likes of Dragon's Breath, which is very nice. But with the sweeping changes aside, we now need to look at what they did to reserve swapping and its side effects. Now, for those not familiar with this, the main thing people use this for is for rally flags. Raid banners, when placing them, tops you off with your super and your ammo. And what a lot of people do was essentially have a piece of armor maxed out with reserves. They would swap to that, rally, and then swap back to their other piece of armor with resist mods, but would still maintain that high ammo count. So that's what this nerf was targeting, essentially armor swapping. Now, with the patch gone through, our ammo count will be reduced if we swap off or unequip our reserve mods. And you can see that happening here as our solar ammo count starts at 10 and 73, and then upon changing our chest piece, they're now 8 and 60. An unfortunate change for all my min-maxers out there, but I actually want to keep you here as we discuss the massive side effects though of this one patch. You may have seen it, but when our reserves are decreased, it actually unprocs things like reconstruction. Literally, it unloads the overflowed ammo. And this is where many recent complaints have come from, because you see, this ammo reset doesn't just happen when you unequip reserve mods. This happens when you change anything. If you swap armor pieces, if you swap weapons, armor mods, even just changing perks on a gun will cause you to lose all of that overflowed ammo. This adversely affects so many banger perks: Reconstruction, Overflow, Ambitious Assassin, and even worse, Envious Assassin. Pretty much any perk that will overflow your ammo count gets hurt here. That means even if you're not swapping reserve mods, that's fine. But if you're sitting there swapping loadouts in the middle of a DPS DPS phase, this will kill any of your overflowed routes, as just swapping anything messes with that. This also means that the ultimate RNG shiny God Roll Edge Transit is literally dead now. No more Envious plus Cascade swaps. Now this one has really left me perplexed here, guys. I don't know if this was like Bungie's way of attacking that specific combo, or if they just got tired of people swapping armor pieces, or maybe they're just trying to give more value to reserve mods, which I get. But whether this was unintentional, or perhaps this is in fact something Bungie was moving toward to push players from spending so much time in their inventory, this was a massive unlisted change. And if you find your weapons being unloaded when loadout swapping, you're not crazy. That's literally happening. Now with those changes out of the way, we can now move on to the rest of the patch, starting with our exotic weapons and armor. Let's kick things off with Graviton Lance. Now this actually isn't in the patch notes or really related to any of the changes that we're looking at, but somehow, some way, Graviton Lance is firing at a slower fire rate. Now it's not that much slower, but it is noticeable. Now Bungie even acknowledged this, and they did state that they are going to be issuing a fix soon. So if you're using Graviton Lance right now and you're like, dude, what the hell happened to my weapon? Don't worry, it will go back to normal eventually. Now as for our first written change, we've got Eriana's Vow. Bungie increased Eriana's Vow damage by 67% versus barrier champions. Now our pre-damage values were a bit different pre to post, but not that much different here. You see it at 11,236, pre-post 11,596. But look at this, guys. The damage to barrier shields seems to be the exact same. Pre was 15,336, post is 15,792. Now this is around 36%, not 67%. And it was 36 or somewhere around 36.5% previously. So it almost seemed like the damage buff here didn't even go through. So someone please clarify this. Maybe we're missing something, or perhaps the buff just didn't happen. Now continuing with the patch notes that just never came to be, we have our Glaive buff, where Bungie increased melee damage in PvE by 20%. And this is wild. We have some pre-footage right here inside of Excision, considering we didn't know that this patch was coming, but it shows our legendary Glaive dealing 12,355 damage to this Taken. Post update, at the same night, we deal just about the same damage, 12,495. So guys, I honestly don't know what's going on here. Glaives dodged this buff just like Eriana's Vow did. We were curious if Winterbite even got the buff, and thanks to Grula and their Build of the Week submission from before 8.0.5, you can see right here, pre was doing 94,993 damage, and post, it deals exactly the same. This has been one broken, buggy update, guys. Bungie seems to have missed the implementation of many of these patches, and the ones that did go through seems to have caused a ton of issues. What's even more concerning is I got people running around going, oh, my Glaive, it's so meta now. Brother, what are you talking about? It's not even doing more damage. And that's what's so crazy here, is that half of these are going unnoticed. But now moving on to the changes that actually made it into the game. We have Duality. Bungie corrected an issue where Duality was not using the Slug Shotgun ADS damage fall off scalar value of 1.2 times. Now we didn't know that this change was going to go through, but if I remember correctly, I think Duality was somewhere around like 8.5 meters, but the max range here post is now 9 meters. For some context, Chaperone is around 11 meters. Now our last impactful exotic weapon change was to another exotic shotgun with a nerf/fix to Conditional Finality. It states that Conditional Finality has had its base handling reduced by 15. It can also no longer freeze players who are in a well of radiance. And as you can see here, guys, the first shot is no longer a good counter to any warlocks sitting in a well. Now this takes us to our exotic armor changes. We're going to start with Radiant Dance Machines. Bungie fixed an issue where players could repeatedly activate the Ascension aspect when they had Radiant Dance Machines equipped. Now post, this doesn't work. Unfortunately, we couldn't get pre-footage of this, but I do know hunters were using this to turn literally into helicopters. Bungie has now brought this in line with other abilities like Ensnaring Slam and essentially preventing it from being spammed. Now next is Lion Rampant. Bungie fixed an issue where you could aim down sights while Lion Rampant's enhanced lift was active without disrupting the lift. To be honest, guys, the last time I really used Lion was when we were running around hip firing with DMT from there. Now understand, Lion's design is all about helping that aerial maneuverability. It also enables accurate hip fire while you're in the air during lift, and it provides a large benefit to your AE stat of all your weapons while hip firing. It seems like Bungie really wants to emphasize us only getting the benefits when hip firing with this exotic, and that aiming down sights should in fact disrupt that lift. And what they mean by that is like if you're aiming down sights and you continually hit your lifts, you can't just continue to scoot around the map. Next we have Getaway Artist. Getaway Artist no longer grants grenade energy on arcs so single hit when the player has Devour active. Now post, you can see us regenerating no energy on hits, although if we're being honest here guys, this is hardly noticeable. I find that our build here, most notably our Getaway Artist, Aruko Sun build, is still extremely strong. And I think if you're rocking Getaway Artist with Bleak Watcher and Devour, you're probably not even gonna notice anything in this nerf. At least I didn't. Now speaking of Warlocks, now we have Solipsism. Bungie fixed an issue where Vortex grenades were granting more energy back than intended with the Spirit of Osmiomancy perk. They also fixed an issue where the super damage bonus from Spirit of Star Eater was being applied to ignitions caused by Song of Flame. Now post, Vortex with Osmiomancy only gives us about 30% energy on the top end. Also Song of Flame does the same ignition damage with or without stacks of Feast of Light. Now that's not to say that Star Eater isn't still good with Song of Flame. Hell, we did damage tests the other day, and from a total damage standpoint, it's still very, very solid. You're just not getting the scaled ignition damage, which does suck, but this is still a very strong choice. Next up, we have changes to weapons in general. The first being the increase to Tech Scout Rifles. Bungie increased our damage here by 30% in PvE. Now you can see it was doing 9,642 damage on a crit to this red bar at Carl. Now it's doing 12,573 per crit. Beautiful thing is that DMT also received this damage buff. Now next we have a precision bow buff in PvP only. Bungie increased our body shot damage from 84.6 to 90, and our critical hit damage from 126.9 to 130.5. Now even with this buff, the damage values do not allow you to one crit one body, so keep that in mind. Then we have one of my most anticipated changes. Bungie reduced flinch for sniper rifles by 50% versus combatants in PvE. Now you can see here from the footage here guys, we have lots of flinch. Hell, getting hit at all pretty much requires you to disengage, but post, not as much. The reticle actually stays on the target when you're aiming most of the time. So if you're considering using sniper rifles outside of damage phase, I would recommend it, especially with the artifact mods. Next we have the change to weapons we didn't know about. Bungie reduced the amount of super energy gained by rocket sidearms per damage event. This was a nerf by 20%. Now post wise, you're getting an all right amount of super per damage event, somewhere around 1 to 2% per shot. Now especially on the rocket assisted frame sidearms also got a fix. Essentially, Bungie corrected an issue that was allowing them to progress ammo finder mods as if they were a primary weapon. Previously, it would have been somewhere around 20 kills with a rocket sidearm to progress ammo finder mods. Now it's around 40 kills to spawn a finder brick, which is quite a nerf. What this really kills, in my opinion, is double special. Next, we have Mountaintop. Bungie added a speed limit to the acceleration applied to the player when rocket jumping with Mountaintop. Now this is a nerf to all the speedrunners out there, as you now cannot ultra accelerate by stacking multiple sticky grenades in one spot. Essentially, you go the same distance, whether it's one grenade or 10, which is quite the bummer. Next, we have Adept Mods. Bungie actually removed all of the negative effects of Adept Mods. And this is actually a big push that Bungie's making to make Adept Mods and Adept weapons more valuable. And they're also going to be including newer Adept Mods down the road. But things like Adept Counterbalance used to give things like -10 range. Adept Mag would give -15 handling. Adept Targeting would give -15 stability. Every one of these negative stats have been removed. The only change was that Adept Targeting has had its aim assist reduced from +10 to now +7. Now, depending on how you look at that, of course, that can be viewed as a nerf. People would use things like Adept Targeting on a sniper rifle where stability really didn't matter all that much. But on every other weapon type, this is going to be greatly beneficial. Now, our last two sections here are on abilities and weapon perks. Now, this applies to both PvE and PvP. The first one being Threaded Specter. Bungie reduced aim assist strength on Threaded Specter by 50% versus players, and they added a short delay before the aim assist takes effect. They also reduced Threaded Specter's detonation damage versus players by 45%. They reduced from 100 at maximum to 60 at maximum, and reduced from 60 at minimum to 30 at minimum. Now guys, the clones were very sticky with aim assist, especially for my controller players. I feel like for the most part, mouse and keyboard players could work around it, but for controller players, it was a get out of jail free card when someone would drop a clone. They would also deal 101 damage. Post though, they almost have no noticeable aim assist, as that delay pretty much guarantees that you'll lock onto the guy behind or near the clone first. And I would assume this was a very annoying thing to change, but honestly, the way they went about it was fantastic. And what this means, even in the middle of a duel, guys, if you got that Guardian one shot, they dodge, they put down a clone, it's a good chance you're still going to be able to clean them up without this clone completely dragging your reticle. And if you do happen to run into that Threaded Specter, don't worry, it's only dealing 60 damage at max. Next, we have Swarm Grenades. Bungie reduced the distance that Swarm Grenades submunition projectiles can travel once they begin tracking a target by 20%. Now, once activated, they would chase for literally 20 meters. These things were so annoying. Post, they now only track for about 16 meters. meters, which is still quite a bit. So it's not like these things are terrible now. You just have to be a bit more intentional with your placements. Now for the big PvE ability updates, Bungie increased Twilight Arsenal damage against bosses and mini boss combatants by 20%. Now we did our super damage testing already, guys, and yes, Twilight Arsenal is putting out. Even though it didn't have the most total damage, keep in mind, this is just one and done. You throw these axes out, not only are you doing a tremendous amount of damage, but you're also applying weaken, and considering the time it takes to get all three of these axes out, you can immediately jump into your damage rotations with whatever set of weapons you got. Now showing the pre and post damage values here, yes guys, it did get a 20% buff, and this applies to even the axes that you pick up. Both the light attacks and the heavy attacks also got this 20% buff. Now Bungie also increased Hammer of Souls damage against bosses and mini boss combatants by 25%. Now the main projectile impact was hitting for 21,496. Post, and now hits for 26,870. And again, when we did our damage testing for this, it's good. Now, would I use Hammer of Soul over Twilight Arsenal? Probably not. Twilight Arsenal is just too damn good. But this buff to Hammer of Soul means that it can be utilized in its ability to run and gun in things like Grandmaster Nightfalls and actually hold its own. Now, moving on to some other abilities, Bungie fixed an issue where the detonation produced by the Unbreakable aspect was being scaled without absorbing damage when using thermite grenades. Now, we did a build on this, and no, it was by no means busted. If anything, this actually made Unbreakable somewhat offensively usable. Look, I'm not going to say there's not going to be a moment in the future where we need Unbreakable, but in my opinion, it is not a good aspect. Thermite grenades having the ability to have Unbreakable at least do some damage gave it a fighting chance. With that being said, Bungie, please, for the love of God, do something with this aspect. It needs way more damage inside of PvE, especially considering the timing cadence that's necessary to even soak the damage. Now, to finish out the pre and post, we did have some weapon perk changes. Now, these were not told to us ahead of time, but they were changes nonetheless. Things like Threat Remover. Bungie increased the buff duration from 5 to 7. They also reduced the pellets to proc from 12 to 11, and they added a handling scaler. Now, for those that are not familiar with this perk, this is a new one. You can find it on shotguns like Beast Walker. Essentially, though, dealing damage with all the bullets in a spread increases reload speed, handling, and stability. I don't think I would use this over things like Slime Shot by no means, or even Threat Detector, considering the ammo economy. But this does give a little more value to Threat Remover, especially the enhanced version of this, as that brings that pellet hit requirement down even further. Now, considering that the ammo economy seems to be getting more flushed, especially in trials this past weekend, you may be able to utilize Threat Remover. It's pretty much all last weekend. We had 2 shots of special every single game. But personally, I just like perks like Slime Shot more. And if you got a good enough shotgun that can land the kill guaranteed and your ammo economy is good enough, then perks like Killing Wind is also good, which boosts a host of things, including range. Next, we have Golden Tricorn. Bungie fixed an issue where Golden Tricorn was activating on ability kills that did not match the weapon's damage type. Essentially more of a fix rather than a nerf. Now, Onslaught. Bungie fixed an issue where enhanced Onslaught could activate on grenade kills. I didn't even know about this, but it clearly doesn't work now, which is unfortunate. I'm kind of curious to know if like Onslaught times 1 through 3 could get activated depending on how many kills you got with the grenade, which sounds nutty. By the way, fellas, if y'all come across stuff like this, let us know, man. This is the juice we need to know about. But that's everything, guys. That is your pre and post testing for our mid-episode patch. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.